Messages that seem perfectly clear to you prove confusing or misleading to others. You tell your hairstylist to take a little off the top, and you're stunned to discover that her definition of a little was equivalent to your definition of a lot. You have a heated argument about the merits of feminism without realizing that you and the other person have been using the word to represent entirely different meanings. Misunderstandings like these remind us that meanings are in people, not words. Semantic rules reflect the ways in which users of a language assign meaning to a particular linguistic symbol, usually a word. Semantic rules make it possible for us to agree that bikes are for riding and books are for reading, and they help us know who we will and won't encounter when we use rooms marked men or women. Now, without these semantic rules, communication could be impossible because each of us use symbols in unique ways without sharing meaning. Semantic misunderstandings arise when people assign different meanings to the same words. Equivocation. Equivocal statements can be interpreted in more than one way. Equivocal language, without realizing that ambiguous statements can have more than one meaning. For example, a nurse gave one of her patients a scare when she told him that he wouldn't be needing his robe, books, and shaving materials anymore. The patient became quiet and moody. When the nurse inquired about the odd behavior, she discovered that the poor man had interpreted her statement to mean that he was going to die soon. Relative words gain their meaning by comparison. For example, do you attend a large or a small school? Well, this depends on what you compare it to. Relative words such as fast and slow, smart and stupid, short and long are clearly defined through comparison. One way to make words more measurable is to turn them into numbers. So healthcare practitioners have learned that patients often use vague descriptions when describing their pain. It hurts a little, or I'm pretty sore, or the use of a numeric pain scale can give more precise response and lead to better diagnosis. Static evaluation is that people are consistent and unchanging, and an incorrect belief is also known as static evaluation. We are more changeable than we are static. Mark is a nervous guy. Mia is short-tempered. Statements that contain or imply the word is lead to the mistaken assumptions that people are consistent and unchanging, an incorrect belief known as static evaluation. We are more changeable than the way static, everyday language describes us. When it comes to describing problems, goals, appreciation, and requests, some language is more specific than others. Abstract language is vague in nature, whereas behavioral language, as its name implies, refers to specific things that people say or do. When taking a look at this abstract ladder, you see that the more abstract, the more vague message would be, you need to have a better attitude. Whereas the more specific thing to say is, you need to complain less about working overtime on weekends. Names shape the way others think of us and the way we view ourselves and how we act. For more than a century, researchers have studied the impact of rare and unique names on the people who bear them. Early studies claim that the people with unusual names suffered everything from psychological and emotional disturbances to failures in college. More recent studies have shown that people often have negative appraisals not only of unusual names, but also of unusual name spellings. Communicators who want to show affiliation with one another adapt their speech in a variety of ways, including their choices of vocabulary, rate of talking, number of placements of pauses, and level of politeness, a process known as speech accommodation. Communication researchers call the process of adapting one's speech style to match that of others is called convergence. So one study even showed that adopting the swearing patterns of bosses and coworkers can help people feel more connected on the job. Communicators who want to set themselves apart from others adopt a strategy of divergence, speaking in a way that emphasizes their difference from others. For example, members of an ethnic group, even though fluent in the dominant language, might use their own dialect as a way of showing solidarity with another, a sort of us against them strategy. Not all linguistic problems come from misunderstandings. Some people understand one another perfectly and still wind up in a conflict. Of course, not all disagreements can or should be avoided, but eliminating 3 linguistic habits from your communication repertoire can minimize the kind of disagreements that don't need to happen, allowing you to save your energy for the unavoidable and important disagreements. The fact, opinion, confusion. Factual statements are claims that can be verified as true or false. By contrast, opinion statements are based on the speaker's beliefs. For example, Fact, you forgot my birthday. Opinion, you don't care about me. Fact, you keep interrupting me. Opinion, you're a control freak. In fact-inference confusion, problems also arise when we confuse factual statements with inferential statements. Conclusions arrived from an interpretation of evidence. Arguments often result when we label our inference as facts. For example, why are you mad at me? I'm not mad at you. Why have you been so insecure lately? I'm not insecure. It's just that you've been so critical. What do you mean critical? I haven't been critical. Emotive language. Emotive language seems to describe something, but actually announces the speaker's attitude towards it. If you approve of a friend's roundabout approach to a difficult subject, you might call her tactful. If you don't approve of it, you might accuse her of beating around the bush. Whether the approach is good or bad is more a matter of opinion than a fact, although this difference is obscured by emotive language. Its statements replace the personal pronoun I with less immediate word it. By contrast, I language clearly identifies the speaker as the source of the message. Communicators who use it statements avoid responsibility for ownership of a message, attributing it instead to some unidentified source. This habit isn't just imprecise, more important, it is an unconscious way of avoiding taking a position. But statements that take the form of X but Y can be confusing, so a closer look at but statements explains why. So in each sentence, the word but cancels the thought that precedes it. You're a really great person, but I think we should stop seeing each other. You've done good work for us, but we're going to have to let you go. These buts often are a strategy for wrapping the speaker's real but unpleasant message between more palatable ideas in a psychological sandwich. This approach can be a face-saving strategy worth using at times. Now, when the goal is to be absolutely clear, however, the most responsible approach is to deliver the positive and negative messages separately so they both get heard. When we've seen I language as a way of accepting responsibility for a message, in contrast, you language expresses a judgment of the other person. Positive judgments, you look great today, rarely cause problems, but notice how each of the following critical you statements implies that the subject of the complaint is doing something wrong. You left this place a mess. You didn't keep your promise. It's easy to see why you language can arouse defensiveness. A you statement implies that the speaker is qualified to judge the target, not an idea that most listeners are willing to accept, even when the judgment is correct. Fortunately, I language provides a more accurate and less provocative way to express a complaint. I language shows that the speaker takes responsibility for the complaint by describing his or her reaction to the other's behavior without making any judgments about its worth. We language implies that the issue is the concern and responsibility of both the speaker and the receiver of a message. It suggests a kind of we're in this together orientation. On the other hand, we statements aren't always appropriate. Sometimes using this pronoun sounds presumptuous and demanding because it suggests that you are speaking for the other person as well as yourself. Gender affects language through content, reasons for communicating, and conversational style. Content is the subject matter of what people talk about. Certain topics, per a research study, were common to both men and women, such as work, movies, and television. The difference between the men and women in these studies were more striking than the similarities. So female friends spent much more time discussing personal and domestic subjects, relationship problems, family, health, and other reproductive matters, weight, food, clothing, men, and other women. Men, on the other hand, were more likely to discuss music, current events, sports, business, and other men. Now, both men and women were equally likely to discuss personal appearance and dating in same-sex conversations. These differences can lead to frustrations when men and women try to converse with one another. Now, researchers report that trivial is the word often used by both men and women to describe topics discussed by the opposite sex. Likewise, some men complain that women ask for and offer more details than necessary and focus too often on feelings and emotions. Both men and women, at least in the dominant cultures of North America, use language to build and maintain social relationships. Regardless of sex of the communicators, the goals of almost all ordinary conversations include making a conversation enjoyable by being friendly, showing interest in what the other person has to say, and talking about topics that interest the other person. How men and women accomplish these goals is often very different, though. Although most communicators try to make their interaction enjoyable, men are more likely than women to emphasize making conversation fun. Their discussions involve a greater amount of joking and good-natured teasing. By contrast, women's discussions tend to involve feelings, relationships, and personal problems. In fact, communication researcher Julia Wood flatly states that, for women, talk is the essence of relationships. When members of a group of women were surveyed to find out what kinds of satisfaction they gained from talking with their friends, the most common theme mentioned was the feeling of empathy, to know that you're not alone, as some put it. Whereas men commonly describe same-sex conversation as something they liked, women describe their same-sex conversations as a kind of contact they needed. The characteristically female orientation for relational communication is supported by studies of married couples showing that wives spend proportionally more time than husbands communicating in ways that help maintain their relationship. Researchers have found that men and women speak roughly the same amount of words per day. One way to analyze gender-linked language differences is to observe men and women talking with each other. In mixed-sex conversations, men are more likely than women to use the sentence fragments, nice photo, judgmental adjectives, reading can be a drag, directives, think of some more, and I references, I have a lot to do. Women are more likely to use intensive adverbs. He's really interested. Emotional references. If he really cared about you. Uncertainty verbs. It seems to me. And relational maintenance questions. How was your day? Women are also more inclined to ask questions that invite the other person to share information. How did you feel about that? What did you do next? The importance of nurturing a relationship also explains why female speech is often somewhat tentative, saying, "This is just my opinion," is less likely to put off a conversational partner than a more definitive, "Here's what I think." Anthropologist Edward Hall identified two distinct cultural ways of using language. Low-context cultures generally value using language to express thoughts and feelings and ideas directly as possible. Low-context communication look for the meaning of a statement in the words spoken. By contrast, high-context cultures value using language to maintain social harmony. So rather than upset others by speaking directly, high-context communicators learn to discover the meaning from the content in which a message is delivered, the nonverbal behaviors of the speaker, the history of the relationship, and the general social rules that govern interaction between the people.